Annalisa Schafgott. I'm the founder of Impli, and I founded the company in April 2019, where I, had a standing job and decided I really wanted to bring this to market, and I saw the opportunities that this could have in the world, not only in healthcare but also in other aspects of the world. My background is varied, so I studied biotechnology at university, degreed to the master level, then decided to work in the commercial field in the chemical industry, and went on to a startup in the genomics space, and then went on to work with pharmaceutical companies in their supply chain and the digitalization of the supply chain. And the idea of Impli came by sheer interest of me having lost my key card, or forgotten my key card, turning up to the office and being locked out, eventually having to go all the way back home and come back from that. So that's why I said there must be a solution for this really simple problem. And I found one, and I looked into it, and I researched a lot about this technology and where it could help us, and I tried to find the really important applications that this can bring, and where will this actually be used, because there are different ways to solving different problems. So today I'm going to talk briefly about the history of implantables. I think it's really important to see where we've come from and how long it's taken us to get there. Then I'm going to touch on where are we right now. So what are we doing right now in the world that can lead us to and through these implantables. And then I'm going to show you some market research that we did as a company throughout the last year and throughout the last 3 months. That's going to give us a little bit of insight about what we can do and which fields might be the fields that people are interested in having implantables in. And then I'm going to speak about the future a little bit. I mean, nanobots, just mentioned by David, which are obviously an interesting area, but also other applications of implantables that are maybe much more short-term future. So I think the first question that I would like to ask, and I think everyone has a different definition at the moment about this, is what is an implantable actually? So we've all heard about wearables, and we use wearables all the time. What's an implantable? Can be really anything, and I'm sure you've all seen implantables in different sectors, especially the medical field here, but an implantable is actually an artificial object that's capable of being inside the skin, so implanted into the body. And now we can think of all of the options out there of what that could be, and what do we have on a day-to-day basis to support that. And I think it's quite important to look at what has been developed. In the 50s, we developed the pacemaker, and coming from that kind of implantable, that's very functional. And we've come from like a big device in a pacemaker. I don't know if you've seen the early days of a pacemaker that was still kind of connected, to now kind of this kind of size pacemaker that sits inside your body and controls your heart, essentially. Cochlear implants for hearing loss and hearing aids. Which are the dental implants, which probably many of us have had experiences with and even carry ourselves inside. The contraceptive implant, which 50% of the world, women have the option of getting to this state, which is free by the NHS. And then obviously augmentation, or if you have ocular implants for vision. So this is really where we have come from the 50s to now, where we use these devices every day to make our lives easier. So personal implantables were very much pioneered by Kevin Warwick, and he was a lecturer at Reading University back then. And Karen Warwick in 1998, so actually for us a significantly long time ago, developed our implantable RFID chips that would sit underneath his, in his case it was the arm, and would control his lights or his office doors. And that was 20 years ago. That was quite a long time ago. And these, it brings the question to mind, if Karen Warwick did it in 1998, why have we not adopted this technology by now? What were like the factors behind us not adopting it? And I think it has a lot to do with the development of technology around us, not only the actual physical development of devices, but also the mentality of devices. So we go from the first computer to the first personal computer to the first mobile phones to the first wearables only in 2009, so after Karen Warwick actually brought out this technology, going to the Internet of Things, where there are more devices per person in the world than there are people, which already brings a huge factor in that. And then going into the very optimized self movement. So what is the optimized self movement? It's, you know, people moving towards optimizing themselves to give the best performance. And that can be, you know, in sports, in work, in how can I be better. I count my steps when I go out to see if I'm fit enough. I measure my heart rate on a regular basis, and so on and so on, which ultimately really leads to the development of the Internet of Humans, which in fact comes with implantables, because you integrate the human into that whole environment. And that can be done by different things. That doesn't only have to be implantables. That can also be done by biometrics. So we already use fingerprints. We use our facial recognition every day. So we're already part of this, and we're already going to be part of this for the foreseeable future. Now the question is, how can implants help that, and what functionalities can implants really bring to us as humans to develop and to be better? So this very much leads into the where are we right now section. If we just explain, like we just explained, the optimized self movement going to the Internet of Humans, we can very much look at this as a circle. Now implantables very much got used in the biohacking space and got adopted in the biohacking space. There's a lot of people out there with implants already. And those were really the experimenters. They started, they looked at this, they said, okay, you know, how can I use it? What can I use it for? What are the different applications of this? And they developed qualitative data for us to have, to use later on, which then goes into the quantified self movement, which means you can quantify that data. You can see, okay, how many data points can I get and how can I make this optimal? And collect these parameters to self-configure them, to learn, and eventually, if we talk about the healthcare applications of this, we really look at the preventative medicine aspect of it. So moving into this constant loop to give us, you know, longevity effects or societarian impacts or healthcare economical impacts later on in the future. And this is really where personalized implantables or the route they are taking at the moment. I think a lot of insight can be drawn from wearables and how we use them at the moment, because they're the external factor of an implantable. So there was a study done in 2019 where a group in Eastern Europe asked themselves, okay, what are all the papers being released in the wearable sector, and what are they actually, you know, telling about the research that is being done there, the development that's being done there? And so they collected all of this data and they grouped it up into different, you know, subgroups. And I'm not sure if you guys can actually read this, but this says monitoring, this says sensor, this says communication. And it very much went towards these kind of core aspects of sensors, monitoring, communication, security being a big one, and acceptance. So let's translate this information that this paper gave us and put it into implantables. What can an implantable do that a wearable cannot do? And part of it, of course, is monitoring, and part of it, of course, is sensoring, because it's inside of our body, meaning it can take up our liquids and it can, you know, show us what we are like from the inside. This really gives us insight about how wearables are moving very precisely towards these healthcare aspects. The other one, obviously, being data security, and how can we keep those aspects safe, and implantables can play a big role in that area as well. So what is it like today? It's been done in Sweden. So in Sweden we've got a use case. We estimate about 50,000 people in Sweden who have implants. They use it for their train ticketing system. So you can board a Swedish train with an implantable and hold your ticket on that device, and then be scanned and that being used. They have set up a micropayment system in a big mall where they said for these 3 days you can pay with your implant for whatever you buy in this mall, and people adopted it really quickly. They said, okay, yeah, great, I'll do it. The first person who ever boarded a train with an implant was also done in Sweden. So the Swedish are very advanced in those sectors and are going into great lengths. But we see implantables being used in the United States for predominantly authentication, so authenticating yourself to another level. We see implantables being done in Japan. That's very much for healthcare. We see, all sorts of industries, especially in kind of payments and especially in other sectors such as transport. Them looking at this and saying, you know what, we need this technology because it solves a need in our market. What we get a lot from kind of businesses and where we see a lot is that they say we need more adoption. We need people to show us that they can actually want this, and this is really the route that is going to slowly evolve for them to adopt the systems where we can use this in our daily life, opening our doors, going into cabs, paying, using autonomous vehicles, and so forth. So then we ask ourselves the question, so what do people think? What do people want in Europe from implantables? And where can we go from this? And we asked 400 people in Europe, and this was relatively random, so we did a Facebook ad and asked Europe in that and said, could you please answer the survey for us? And of course we had to mention implantables themselves, and we had to mention our company. So there might be biases I'm going to discuss in a second. However, what we wanted to establish is really, what is the first reaction? The survey was not very long. It was 10 questions long. It was 5 minutes to take. So that was the data from it. We had quite a good gender spread across this, from young age to old age, and it was possibly more towards the older ages that we got a lot of uptake for this. There's one gender bias that we had where we had 60% females and 38% of males answering the survey, but there was no particular bias in age groups per se. Now when we asked them, would you get an implant, we actually had quite a surprising amount of numbers saying yes, I would get an implant. And we had the expected numbers saying no, I wouldn't. And it was pretty even split, 50-50. If we look at, what the others said, so from the, what would people reply to that? There was about 5% of maybes, maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't, I'm not sure. There were 3% who said, I just need more information about this, I don't know anything about it. And then there were 3% who said, yeah, I would, but it would have to have certain functions for me to do that. We looked at the genders, and surprisingly to us, there was no bias. It was pretty 50-50 split on who said yes and no. And if we looked at the age groups and we divided it up, it was very surprising that the age group that was most likely to be willing to have an implantable was 51 and over. The same, obviously, the same was true from 31 to 40-year-olds. The age group that was most against it, surprisingly, was 26 to 30, which is an interesting drive, which was unexpected from our behalf. However, to have 50% of people telling us yes, I would get one, it's a matter of why haven't we done this? Why are we not why are we not moving into that direction? So we also asked them, what's the most important aspect for you in a company for implants? What would make you decide to get an implantable from such and such company? And 30% of people said it's data security. And I think that's quite prominent to telling us that this is the way it should be, and building good tech and ethical tech is really important in a space like implantables especially. And any implantables company should be focusing very strongly on this. The second part was a clinical approach. Now, for the time being, this has been done in a very underground setting. So was that one part that kept people from doing it, that it wasn't readily available, and they weren't able to just go down the road and get their implant? Was that a factor why it hadn't been adopted? And thirdly, it was functionality. And we know the functionality bit is somewhat due to systems around us not being ready for this. But it's quite interesting with functionality, as this is something that will be a long-term view, but it'll also be a chicken and egg scenario until we get there. Now, when we ask them, what would you like your implant to do? So if functionality is 22% of the reason why you would choose to have an implant from a specific company, then what would you want to use it for? And we went in, and I need to be really honest with this, I went in with this vision of like, people want sensors, people want, vital signs. That's what people want, And when we asked them, there's actually only 30% who said, yeah, I want to know, what my glucose levels are, what my lactate levels are, which was surprising to me because that would have been something that I would have had a bias towards. And 35% for identity is actually really high. In 2014, the European Union looked at this sector and said, okay, this is out there, this is a possibility for identity. Are we going to do this in the EU or not? And they wrote a long paper, I think it was 6 pages long, and said, no, we're not, because of ethical issues, because we can't force upon people to have implants, which is right by them. And back in 2014, and that was earlier, but if 35% of people would want an implant for that functionality, should that be an option in the future? The same goes for access, so accessing your door and accessing your car and going out there. That is also one of the major driving factors. Payments, of course, 34%, which was quite expected. So there was a survey done in London in 2019 in the summer, and they asked 1,500 people, what do you want to pay with in the future? And 11% of people came back and said, I want to pay with an implant, which is a very telling sign of where the whole payment world is going from that aspect. And of course, medical information. Now, this is where our slight bias was in. By mentioning our company name, we obviously put a bias in there because we as Impli, we built an application that interfaces with an implant and holds your medical records at all times, so that if you have an accident on the road, you can be found, people can scan you, people know who you are, and people know your pre-existing conditions. But it can also be used just to communicate your medical history with a healthcare professional, especially when you're in foreign countries. And this really brings us to Impli and the initiative that we set up in London at the moment. So we went into this company saying we want to make people's lives more convenient and safer using implantable technologies. And we looked at all the applications we could have gone into, and we chose an application that was quickly and easily adoptable and would bring immediate value to our customers. And that was in healthcare. So healthcare records that a person can put inside themselves, load up and kind of keep like an emergency card with them at all times, but would also record, your medications that you're on. Many people who are on medications, it's quite hard to remember all of the, drugs that you're being prescribed, and so forth. And we launched this app in January this year. We launched our implantation service in January this year. And we're doing this in London only at the moment to use it as a trial to see can we do this? Are people interested? How much demand is there? And we do this by a very easy booking system. So you book online, you get an appointment, you go to your implant station, which we set up, you download our application and you start using it with your implant. And I can do a demonstration with my implant. That's here. So if you want to see it on a closer level, I'm happy to come around and show you. But there, it just scanned my implant. It flashed up in yellow, and you can see my medical information. if there is a functionality where we can show you on the implant itself. But this is the app that we use and we've built at the moment. So that's what we're setting up here. So here's a quick overview of the information it stores and the interface it looks like. Now the really big question is, of course, this is very valuable and very useful, but would we get many people using implants just for their medical records? At the moment, we ask people, how do you keep your medical records? 30% say we keep it with our doctor. So is that really like the vision of, or is that enough convenience to convince people to use implants on a daily basis or regularly? And this is really where we ask the question, what are the future applications? What does the future actually look like in this space? If we can do this today, what's the next step after this? And I think it's important to understand what areas to look at. You can either look at kind of the smart city area, so the IoT area, so integrating yourself into the environment as a human, and you can look at it from the internal area, so internalize in your body. What does it measure? How does it measure? Where does it measure? And for what? And these obviously somewhere overlap. So applications in smart cities could be access to gyms. This is being done in Sweden, but for sure not in wide market, but access to your car. So we had conversations with car companies, so manufacturers, who said, okay, you know what, your idea is actually really important for us in autonomous vehicles, because autonomous vehicles won't have keys anymore. How can they have keys? Because, you know, we use them, we will use them at the same time, which means that a fingerprint for a car is not an ideal situation because it gets wet and it's difficult to read. And facial recognition might also not be a good access method for that. So that's the point where we say, okay, maybe that's a solution for implantables to use. And maybe that's a route to go down towards. The same goes obviously for passports, as we mentioned already, accessing, you know, safes and so on, and the world around us. Now, internally, we have different metrics. We want to measure what's our glucose level like, what's our heart rate like, what's our temperature like, and how all interact within each other to tell me more about my health status of healthcare at this point in time. So, at the moment, going very much into the healthcare vision and what healthcare looks like in the implantables world, we're at the medical identity state, which is just over here. You know, we're at the very beginning. We're saying, okay, you can get your medical identity with you can carry it with you at all times. We could integrate it into systems if that was so thought. The second level out there are electronic sensors, so temperature, heart rate. So I've got a temperature sensor right here, it measures my temperature. And this is something that we're looking to launch. Now, what can temperature tell us? Temperature can be very valuable for insights on contraceptive methods, so or fertility rates, or it can be very interesting for cancer patients because their immune system is depressed. So, you know, what can those levels tell us? Or it can tell us information about, you know, our general well-being as a person. The next level after electronic sensors are really the biosensors. So, can I measure chemicals with it that sit subcutaneously? And that could be glucose for diabetics, but also for pre-diabetes, big problem in the world. That could be lactate for sports people, so people under a lot of stress. That could be cortisol levels, also people who have, you know, high working positions, people who are under very stressful situations, to be able to monitor that and to be able to regulate that from some level. But biosensors can also be used to measure drug related, you know, how much drugs does my body take up? So people who've had valves replaced, heart valves replaced, that are on warfarin, and that takes a long time to adapt that kind of medication. So can we measure with an implantable if our body is taking up the drug as we want it to? So it goes very much into that precision medicine area, and that also plays in mind with, okay, you know, what about pharmacogenomics? How does that work with the actual facts, so the phenotypic data that we get from that? Obviously, it then goes also into accessibility. So how does that work? For example, an ethanol sensor for driving a car, for preventing drink driving, or the interaction with other devices. Does my device then suddenly interact with the ultrasound device that's at my doctor that can tell you even more information by gathering that data and doing quick analysis? And how does that whole information get processed in an artificial intelligence way? So how can we actually predict from that what will happen? Will the surgery be successful based on the metrics that we get from the internal body at that point in time? And these are really exciting potential applications in healthcare in the future. And these are really measurable, and this can be done with implantables like this, but also nanobots in the future for sure, when we go further down the line. But I think that we have to think about the healthcare system as a whole. I think that looking at just one part, how does it help the one individual human is not enough, but how can we use implantables to drive a better future for the whole system in itself? And that can obviously mean the Internet of Things in the hospital itself. So that means linking your implantable to the wheelchair that you use, to the blood samples that you give, and building a system around that securely keeps your records, but also very accurately keeps your records. So if we think about the UK, where 20,000 people each year die of mismedication, could we save people in that way? Could we make systems more efficient? The second point is obviously monitoring chronic diseases. How can we monitor chronic diseases better? How can we make lives more efficient? How can we let people live longer and live better? And then obviously the precision medicine applications that we spoke of before, and the preventative medicine applications to alleviate strain on the healthcare system. And all of these together can give us better and faster care, easier disease detection, and then obviously better long-term disease management and automation of our administration processes around it. So this is really looking at the full system out there. Now, implantables are not just healthcare. Implantables can be used for other areas. And I do think there's a strong movement towards that. We as a company focus on healthcare, but there could be many other applications. And you could have one implant that does multiple things. And it allows us to be a better human in our electronic environment that we face right now. And this is really what we do as a company and what we want to bring to the world. And so, thank you very much. Can I answer any questions?
Thank you so much, Anna. So, does your healthcare records reside on this chip, or is there an identifier so that people will effectively find your healthcare records online?
Yes, so you can solve that problem in two ways. At the moment, we've got the app linked to an identifier that allows us to store more data. Currently, the chips that we have hold 1,000 bits. So you can store some information on it, and I would recommend everyone to store their most important information on there. So let's say blood group, or if you have, a long-term disease. But all the other information I would just store on the app, where it's quite user-friendly. And as we know, every hospital has internet, and unless you're in a situation where there's really no internet, then you would go back to that.
So in general, if somebody gets prescribed an important new drug, would they have their chip reprogrammed to include this information?
Yes. So you can edit the information at all times. At the moment, it's all editable by the person that owns the device and owns the account, but in the future we're looking to integrate that into medical systems, so that means that a doctor could upload that information directly over there, so that you wouldn't make any spelling mistakes, and otherwise the information would be as correct as possible.
Right. And what kind of take-up do you expect of this in due course? Is it going to be a slow, linear progression, or do you expect various tipping points to come that might suddenly make a whole community say, you know what, now I see my friends, my colleagues, my respected family members using this, it makes sense for me to go there as well?
Yeah, it's actually a good question. And I think it's an important one to ask, looking at the progression of this. I think it will come with tipping points. I mean, there will be very slow adoption in the beginning, simply because when we asked people, did you know about implants before you did this survey? 50% of people said, no, I had no idea. So that means that there's not even the education that this even existed, which means we have a long way to go on that front, let alone communicating what they can do with it. So there will be a very, very slow beginning, and I think it will come with dragging it from the underground where it is right now to bring it to a more mainstream application. Now, other tipping points come in when we go into sensors. So when a device can deliver more functionalities, remember 22% of people said what was really important to them was, functionalities around it. When we bring more functionalities, there's going to be more adoption because it's going to give us more convenience or, more applications of it. So it's just a matter of time and going through these steps that we will get to that point.
Phil?
Say, for instance, if I had an implant and I was taken ill, and how would a medical team know that I had it? Say, a paramedic.
Yes, we of course get that question quite often because it's part of our system that's currently still somewhat amiss, and it's a very important aspect for us. So we started in only London. So we've got lots of competitors globally, and they focus on all sorts of markets. We focus on only London because we want to create that system. So we communicate with ambulance services, with paramedics. I send emails out telling them there's so and so many Londoners who have this device. And we want to set this up. So we really want to do this just in London so that we can prove that the whole ecosystem actually works. And it'll be a chicken and an egg scenario for quite some time before we get to kind of the mass adoption. But if we don't start somewhere, they will never pick it up from the level, from the institution itself, because if you go to the institutions, they have an ethical battle to fight with this technology that the person, the individual, doesn't.
Roland?
If you have an implant patient with an implant, do you need an implant-equipped doctor, or do you work according to a standard that can be read by any of these devices of your competitors?
It can be read by any device. So if you had an implant, I think that answers your question.
That's near field, no?
Yes, that's NFC. That has a unique identifier. Currently, that's how we work, that you can integrate it to the application.
Yes, but they need your application. There is no general kind of medical implant reading standard to which these applications conform.
Currently, not that we know of.
Okay.
We're trying to set up an association around this. We're trying to work with regulators. We're trying to do a lot of things in that space to get standards in place and to get this into a progression, because one of our key aspects is to keep it safe and high quality, because I think this is something that is really important in the field to make it go from the underground where it is right now and make it available to human beings, which is very much in the medical world because it sits under your skin. We're working towards it, but currently there's no standard as we know. Obviously there's like file formats like NDEF and so on, but not a standard for implantables at the moment.
Question at the back there?
Hi. So I come from the other side. I'm from the biohacking underground world you were talking about. Said your data that over 51 was the most likely to uptake this. Of all of the implants I've put into people, I have never put one over the age of 50. All in the 26 to 31, so super surprised by that. I was wondering how many people so far over the age of 50 have you implanted into?
So currently we have over 50 have not implanted anyone over 51 that I know of, unless they hit their. We don't ask them for their age at this, except that they're over 18, obviously. But so not that I know of.
I just find interesting the data skewed the opposite to what I'm seeing in the real world.
Absolutely, I think it has to do, and this is just my analysis of the data. Bear in mind, we got this data kind of last week, so. There's a lot of thinking going on and strategizing in the company as well on how to interpret it. I think the move for the over 51s is because they're more faced with medical problems generally. So that could be one driving factor. The other driving factor could be that they're less about the invasive side. So they might be open to more procedures in that way. I think why they haven't gone to the underground community is because there are not so many.
Yeah, I get it. We look scary. I get it.
No, that's not what I wanted to say.
I'm aware I look weird.
No. But they're just not in that world. They might not even be informed about it. So this is really why taking it from that community that did a really great job of developing and promoting this and bringing it to a level where the 51-year-old and plus might actually have access to it. And we actually speak to a lot of elderly care homes and there's big interest in there for having implantables because of the obvious reasons.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Julia?
Yeah, thank you. So, if I understood correctly, you have more than one implant currently. One is for reading your medical information, and the other one is for reading your body temperature. So, my question is, do you need to scan every implant separately, or they can communicate and convey their data to one centralized feed?
Yeah, so we're not yet at the point of interaction between implants. So they're devices that don't have batteries, and I think that's really important because having a battery under your skin is quite problematic and quite difficult. And then otherwise, how would you harvest energy to give like a live stream of information over? So you do need a reader, and near field communication, so NFC, is very much near. So you can't read it from a distance either. Right. So you've got a 1 centimeter distance that you have to read it. So at the moment, yes, you do have to read them individually. That being said, I don't think there's an NFC temperature sensor out there at the moment. There might be in the medical device world. I'm not quite sure. We're hoping to bring one out at some point, but this one, for example, and don't do this at home, is one from the animal world. And I just experimented and saw, can we do this? Is this feasible? What can we do with it? And it gets read by RFID. So
thank you. And also you said that when you're reading, actually your phone is sending energy to your sensor, to your implant.
Yes. So that's how the NFC works. So there needs to be a device that sends energy into the semiconductor that sends information back. So that's how there's a quick information of exchange, and that's how we don't need a battery to do this with.
But the same as credit cards or Oyster cards, there's no battery in there,
yeah.
but it receives a pulse of energy from the reader.
Yeah. Correct.
Tony?
Yes. I have very few, very quick, short questions. Do you have a website? How much it costs? Can I get it? I'm over 51.
You're over 51.
So I would qualify.
Yeah.
Are there any licensing problems that you may have? Are you considering it? Are you outside the sphere of big implants like prosthetics? And the final one are about brain implants. I finished it.
Exactly. Very interesting questions.
I have a very long question on that one.
Yeah. So yes, we do have a website. Impli.org is the address. You can find us there. You can obviously find us on social media under Impli World, and follow us there, please. Yes, you can get one. We're live. Considering regulations, so this is something that we've had many discussions about. We've had a lot of research being done. Currently, they're unregulated devices. There is no regulation. We're trying to get through to regulators. We're trying to make regulations around this because it's so important for us to build regulations in this space so that we don't have, another crash in this, and actually manage this time around from 1998 to now to bring it onto market and actually bring the benefits
I can
to
give you
people.
one feedback.
Yes.
There's one implant that's going to be regulated in America by FDA. This is the Neuralink implant.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's a possibility.
It's a bit of a different device than what we have. So personal implantables to Neuralinks. I think there's like a step, and that I guess goes to your last question. I think there's a step in between, and we're kind of the step before that. Before you would get a brain implant, you're probably more likely to get an implant that helps you every day. There are applications for Neuralinks, and there are very strong applications for Neuralinks, and they have huge benefits. And I do think that that brain implants are a vision of the future, and will definitely get adopted, and have been adopted in many ways. And they will get there are FDA-approved implants such as this, but they have to have a medical function, or they have to be in a medical system, which is the problem with the regulation. So in Europe, it's the MDD, or soon to be MDR regulation for medical devices, that says unless it's in a medical system or it senses any medical information, it's not deemed as a medical device, which is problematic for us because we say it is a medical device, technically speaking.
But I want to see the danger from a competitive point of view, that if they device, so make a device that is implanted in the brain and gets all the information, almost all the information about your body status, then your implant will not be viable. So I'm just looking perhaps 3 years ahead.
I completely agree, and when we talk about nanobots, it's the same. Will our implant be necessary if we have nanobots? It's not the question about in 15 years, 20 years time. It's about what can people adopt right now. And if people don't adopt this, they're for sure not going to have a brain implant. Even I'm quite cautious when I say I'm going to, put electrodes into my brain, or when I say I'm going to inject nanobots into my bloodstream. It's one level above than just going underneath the skin, where I understand.
Maybe more than one level.
Maybe more than one level. So I do agree with that, and us as a company are looking to innovate, and that means develop in the future.
Can you say something about the cost?
Yes. Sorry, I forgot that question in the middle.
Yes.
So we currently have a promotion on, so we sell them at £80, and the retail price otherwise is 120, and then that's excluding VAT. What we're trying to do with our pricing model is to make it as easy as possible for our customers to get one, as well as not overpricing them, because that just builds barriers and not underpricing
And
them.
then you pay separately for the insertion.
No, this is including. Yeah.
Alan?
Very good. We'll come back to that.
So, I understand you're representing the technology in an aspirational manner. You have something to help the world, which is great. I want to hear all that. But at the same time, one of the sort of missions of the London Futurists is to understand opportunities and risks.
Yes.
So I also want sort of a balanced expose of all the things that can go wrong. And just to give an example, I work in technology, and Bruce Schneier, one of the big security gurus, has written extensively about the Internet of Things, because there was a lot of aspiration for the Internet of Things, and he's written about how, from a security perspective, it's actually quite a disaster, because most devices have got no cautionary, security model. So that's just a request for a
dialogue.
More balanced on the risks, because it might be positive as well. Because if I hear more about the risks, I'll be more willing to believe it's been assessed, and not a lot of new technologies, especially, go wrong very easily. They focus only on the positives, and specifically on the thing about who owns the information, whether it's how much is in the device. I think Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who is credited with inventing the internet, he has been continuing to work on a project called Solid, which is about letting individuals own their own information when they're interacting with things on the internet. And it's morphed into a company called Inrupt, and Bruce Schneier works with him.
Yeah,
so it might be a good collaboration to look at the security, privacy elements, and who owns the information, and see if you can get on top of that platform.
Absolutely, no, very interesting, and I do agree with you. There's critical aspects to this, like there is with any technology there is out there, and I think we need to be very, very cautious about the critical aspects, and this comes to do with applications, but data security. That 30% of people say that data security is their major aspect of why they would choose a company, actually brings it to the forefront of this. But we have this problem not only in implantables, we have this problem in wearables. If you think about the Fitbit and Google acquisition and the complications around
leave it behind. You can decide not to be vulnerable by leaving it behind. So it's like a bit awkward when it's you've got to dig inside yourself to get it out.
Yeah, no, exactly. So you can remove it, which is also a good thing, because you can't remove your fingerprint and you can't remove your face, or it's very difficult to do that. So there are positives and negatives of it, of course. Looking at every company needs to make their own statements about this. We look to be an ethical company, and data sharing should be by consent only, and this should be held with encrypted data. So we're currently collaborating with a company called Circogene on using homomorphic encryption on this data, so that it is safe. I think we can only do as a company as much as we can to make sure that our devices are safe, and that we bring out applications that are really ethical rather than the unethical sides. But there are unethical sides towards sensing. So are people becoming too obsessed about their data? Is this whole doing steps, is that too much? How can we regulate this? is there a point where we can say, to not obsess people, only the doctor can read out the data, or only the doctor can see the data, and the patient never sees the data, he just knows that the doctor's looking after them. So I think when we look at technologies, we just need to look at and I do agree, we need to look at the bad sides in terms of understanding them, and for example, things like Black Mirror did a great job at presenting the bad sides of technology. But I think we can't leave technologies behind just because there's one angle of it that's bad. There's bad things to the internet. There's bad things to all technologies. There's bad things to a knife. So I think what's really important to be said is that let's criticize it and let's try to build good tech. And that's kind of the way that we look at the company and try to bring it forward.
Question there?
So full disclosure, I'm one of the Swedes you talked about.
Wonderful.
So I'm very for it.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of interesting applications that you discussed in identity access control payments. On a technical level, I guess to be cynical, they're essentially reading and writing data in a passive way. It just happens to be that it's inside your body. It's not easy to steal. It's not easy to get. But I guess it would be interesting to hear what the next step is. Not 10 years from now, but what is the first active powered device? I don't know, you are looking at or that you see.
From active powered devices.
Yes.
So, we're in conversations with a lot of groups in this space, and some groups are coming up with really interesting ideas, harnessing energy from the body themselves, ideas around that, ideas how you can use this energy to give an active stream. I think that's the most innovative that we've seen so far. It's not easy to build that technology into the body. It has been done before, but we're still a long way away from commercialization. So if I talk about biosensors, I think that's within the next 10 years. If I think about active devices that send a signal out, I think that's within 20.
And is there any particular application that seems to be driving that? So something that we need that thing for, essentially, that would get us there?
It's a good question. There's many applications that could be really useful for, and we can think of many because it can send a continuous stream of information forwards. I'd have to think about that more strongly.
Do you have a comment on that point?
Yeah, mine's to follow up to this.
Yeah.
There's been a LiPo battery implanted into the arm here. We use key charging, wireless charging for it.
What kind of battery, sorry?
LiPo, lithium polymer.
Lithium
It
polymer.
took one hit and then it expanded and exploded inside his arm. Was not a pretty
Yeah.
day.
So that's the reason not to rush ahead and
Don't
put
put
batteries
batteries in
inside
the
this.
body.
Yeah.
I think the implant was about this big. It was huge.
Yeah.
Do not recommend.
Yeah.
That's not a service you're offering.
No, and not in the near future until that goes through some stage of development. I think to that, lots of people have tried this external energy charging mechanism. The problem is the skin is not like a device. Even if you put your phone onto a wireless charger, it gets really hot, and you feel things getting really hot really quickly inside of your body. So that was the experience that other people had in this relam. But I do think that there's a great space that will open up in 20 years' time, going for active devices. I mean, you can think of the monitoring aspects of it.
Roland?
On the current NFC devices, if you get one and you find after some time that it gets hacked, other people can pretend that you are you. Then you want to get rid of it and get an update. Is there a standardized way of getting rid of them? Obviously, surgeon can cut open and dig, but is there something standardized that you go in with a needle, click into the implant and pull it out?
Yes. So if you've seen the contraceptive implants that are out there, I've got one here. I've got lots of implants. You can pull them out with a hook. That's how they work, and that's how they get removed.
It has a little eye, and you just have to find the eye. And
Yeah,
pull it
and then you pull it out to get that. So removals of implants, and maybe Aidan can explain more, is actually being done quite often. We implant into the hand, so trying to find your implant is not too much of a problem in order to take it out. The good thing is obviously you can take it out, whereas when you think about deep fakes and so on, that is like your identity on the internet, which you can't take out anymore, which this technology at least prevents.
Dave, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say about search and rescue. I guess from what you were saying earlier, it's probably more a case of an active device rather than a passive one would be needed to search if someone goes missing in the wilderness, for example. Would a passive device be able to service that need, or would you need an active or active device?
So in my opinion, that could be a passive device that could work. If you look at avalanche sensors, so I ski, so
Right,
there are passive devices that can work. So if you made it into an implantable, then that would be possible.
So searching aircraft, we'd be able to pick up a signal by sending a signal and then listening for an echo back?
Yes, it would work like the Reco devices that avalanches work. That could work. I'd have to think about further how that would work or what different technologies there are. There are also different frequencies you can use. I mean, near field frequency is not the only implantable device there are. There are RFID devices that have a longer frequency range. There are UHF devices that have a longer frequency range that could be read from further away. It would just be a matter of seeing what are the ranges that you're looking for and more details around that.
Right.
But I think for search and rescue could be a good application in the military, could be a good application in in regions that you can't reach so easily. Definitely.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm a little bit curious about the devices themselves. I mean, you're not manufacturing the implantable, you source the implantable from a third party. So in the sphere of people who are manufacturing these devices, is there a trend towards making larger storage in them, or to making them a more customisable device? Because you said that it's 1K device, which when you just go, God, it's 1980s technology. What are we doing? But is it going to be that if we look 5 years ahead from now, people are going to be able to store 10,000 MP3s in their thumb?
Yeah. That's a good question. So we do see trends. We see trends in miniaturization, so making smaller devices and making devices smaller, which also means making devices more powerful. I think the earlier devices were not as powerful as these ones, and they're kind of continuing to develop that. We are trying to do that too in some respect, because obviously holding your information directly on your chip is better than on an application. So miniaturization is definitely a trend, and it's definitely going forward in that area. The other area for hardware is in the sensing world, so building sensors or building other functionalities around it. So there's different tag types of NFC chips that work with different functionalities. So,
the follow-up question to that is there much competition in that space, or is it only a fairly small number of companies?
It's a fairly small number of companies if we consider like other industries. It's actually a tiny industry. There's a couple of manufacturers. There's a couple of manufacturers in America. There's a couple in Sweden. There's factories in China that produce them, that have experience with this kind of implantable. So in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small amount of companies who do this at the moment, and it's a very specialized kind of skill to have.
Phil?
I have a question about marketing. You talked about reaching a tipping point, and the word trend being used in different contexts. The thing that brought this up in my mind was a friend of mine many years ago bought himself a pair of 18-karat gold collar stiffeners. So these were very high prestige items from Asprey's, and they went into his collar in his shirt, and nobody saw them. Only he knew that he had this prestigious item. And it goes to me that wearables are things that people show, that they can become trendy. So a taxi driver was raving about a new Apple Watch that would read his heart rate and things like that. But these are hidden. It isn't something that you can show off about. And I'm just wondering whether there might be some way of having it so that you've got some sort of special tattoo on your hand, or something where you can show.
Some people have this.
You could sell a T-shirt with it, couldn't you?
We do.
Has this prestigious, latest trendy thing.
One of those buttons instead of the baby on board one is like.
Yes. Yes, no, absolutely.
To answer your question, I think that interface is going to be really important. But if you look at the health optimization component, Swoosh is a company which doesn't have a visual component, it's just a band on your wrist. and basically has real-time monitoring into a system or a platform. And I think that's where wearables and implantables become sort of merging together. So I think you will have that look, but as we go further down the line, think of insurance companies, think of how we pushing and driving for that information to be used in a commercial sense. Is when, do you care about it being shown, or do you care about the fact that you get 50% off your life insurance because you wear a device? So I think you've got closed loop systems which become really interesting. Then you've got the B2C component where it's directly to market, where you're talking about health optimization, talking about real life, where people just want to know more. And I think we're moving away. I think Apple will be a reader of this device in the future. So I think you would use those wearables as a reader because your ecosystem becomes important and connecting to the wider ecosystem. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like the marketing aspect of this is a really crucial and important part of it, and it's a really crucial and important part of kind of our company, because we have to, we have to let people know that there is a good side of this, and that there is useful applications out there. And I think it comes with the applications and the functionality that this becomes popular. We did try to solve that problem, or actually our collaborators did try to solve that problem with an LED. So if you were down here, you could see it. I can show you later. So when you scan it, there's an LED that flashes up, and the LED comes in different colors. So people can choose colors. So for example, at the moment we've got very rare orange ones. We only have 20 orange ones. So whoever has an orange one is for sure one of the early adopters.
It solves the problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can show.
Exactly.
Well, making visible the number of people, in some sense, the number of people who've already adopted them is an interesting question. What surprised me from your opening remarks was the number of people in Sweden who already have these, because if you'd asked me, I'd have said maybe in the hundreds, but I think you said...
No, it's a lot more. They've been doing it for a long time.
Yes.
I think that's important. Like, I think 2012 or 2014 they started. I'm not quite sure when they started with this, but quite a long time ago. So they've been doing it for years already. So, and they had a big use case. I mean, if someone would tell me you can put your Oyster card into your implant, I would be like, yeah, for sure, because I lose my Oyster card all the time.
Alan?
So we've heard about sensor-based implantables, where it's basically read-only. The information comes out of the body. But I think I remember Kevin Warwick's. He did an experiment with his wife had a sensor, and he could think a thought and she could feel it, or vice versa. So there was active response in the body. So have you got any information about the opportunities for those things? Are you involved or interested in those things as well, where there's some state change in the body as a result of the implantable?
Yeah. So very interested in it. Not involved in it at the moment, just because we do have a research angle of the company, but we're looking very much at trying to commercialize just the base of it, rather than going into very advanced figures, which also goes into neural pathways and neural implants. I think there is use for it. So there are many people who think, so if you know, for example, Body Data Space in London, they talk about the vision of communication with implants. So can they identify hands and gestures, and how can they interact with our communicating world around us? And I think it's really important to think about the other use cases. I mean, I really touched on healthcare, but it's a technology, and technologies can be used for very many things. And yes, Karen Warwick did go into that kind of research where he, could control, I think it was heat or light underneath the skin. And if we look at what very early adopter biohackers or cyborgs do at the moment, they also very much go into the feeling and sensing part of it. So if you've heard about a company called North Star, sorry, yes, thank you. North Star, they very much go into the sensing part of things, so that you can feel things, so they can tell where north is at every point. So I think there are companies out there that do that. There are people out there that look for this kind of information.
The heads up on the North Star, technically not implantable. It just sits on two piercings. It doesn't actually go inside your body.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. I would have classified that. Yeah, I would have classified that as.
It's a high rejection rate.
Incredibly high rejection. You get about a 10% success rate with them.
Really? Yeah, they're quite invasive.
North Star's pretty much gone.
Yeah.
They're no longer really around. They didn't do too well.
Really?
Yeah, they so they
They only
bolted.
came out 2 years ago or something.
Yeah,
like that.
they had a bit of a buzz for a while.
Yeah.
And they kind of went because as David was saying about the rejection rate and a couple of other stuff that was going on the way that they were actually kind of like bolted onto the skin. There was problems with them.
Yeah, they were also quite big. They were like devices.
Yeah,
like
they
that
were huge.
large.
They stuff in the chest. And
Yeah.
I see. I have known people that have had them and not had them anymore. So
Yeah.
I mean, the safer side of the stuff that you guys are doing is it's so small, and the chance of rejection is really not that high at all. It's a massively different approach to doing something that's actively powered and something that's that large. So.
Yeah, so actively powered, and those are really tricky questions to answer. That's why we're not doing them. But there are companies, so there are people out there who like try to measure electromagnetic waves to feel certain things. So that's some people in Barcelona are working in that space. So there are other applications, just not that commercially available.
Yeah, I was thinking we've talked quite a lot about the physical health, area where this can be applied, but the very, in day and age, very topical of mental health as well. And we touched upon medication, and I'm thinking of the vast, amount of people taking antidepressives and anxiety and things like that. We should also kind of touch on whether this one can sense whether these medications work, and one can tell a doctor, I'm feeling better by taking this medication, but I'm wondering if there's actually any way that it can be proven that it does indeed work, or is that too alien? Is it only a person that can say, I'm actually happy, or is there a way that the device can actually sense whether that particular antidepressive works?
I think,
does that make sense?
I think for clinical trial
Because,
companies,
mental
it's
health issues is just such a topic,
absolutely.
today.
For clinical trial companies, it'll be really revealing how much is actually a placebo effect of the drugs that we take. And I mean, if you know the study with the horse, with the 2 horses that got the same medicine and they suddenly both got better, so it's not just a human thing, it's also an animal thing, the placebo effect. But yes, so that would be one of the applications in the future. So you could think about doing that with biosensors. It would just take time to develop, and you'd have to prove, and you'd have to see if that's possible, how it's possible with nanobots, possibly much more likely.
In 3 weeks' time, in London Futurists, we have a talk by Martin Dinoff about some of the techniques that his company is investigating to provide more reliable feedback about people's mental states. Because notoriously we're often bad at assessing our own mental states, just as we often like to think, hey, we're above average drivers, and many people in a similar thing are not aware of quite the fluctuations of our own mental state. Sometimes people over-exaggerate, and sometimes people under-exaggerate. So that's one way to explore this topic further. You had a point on this as well?
Just a question, I mean, just from Louis' side as well, are you trying to say that you can depict mental health, or are you saying you don't want to read the underlying markers which could depict the effectiveness of medication? So if you take medication, they can read medication levels. If you take mental health, is it the cortisol levels inside your body that you're trying to read? What are the fundamental markers that you're trying to read which indicate that you're in a healthy state? Because I think we should differentiate between a physical healthy body and someone who's suffering from an underlying mental health issue, and whether it's a chemically based one or whether there are other issues that need to be dealt with.
So my brain was kind of, as my thought process went around, having, colleagues and friends that are suffering from mental health, have tried several different medications, and it takes a long time till they find something that actually sort of works. Side effects, etc., because it all has to do with your, age, lifestyle, all of it. So I think it was more from a perspective of could this device sort of actually indicate what would work better for that person?
I think precision medicine precision medication would be a more of an appropriate component, because it would read and be able to say this is working. So if it's not being taken up and it's not showing in the bloodstream, it's because of this, and how it's being.
That's the complexity of it. Yeah. Is it the person that says, "Hey, I'm happy," or is it the device saying, "Actually, it's because that's kind of on the border of, how much can a technology, sense what our feelings rather than showing physically. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Saying that you're sad, there's no measurement to that. Like how long is a stick?
Well, we have hormones that we
Yeah.
could measure along that rate, thinking from a like purely scientific perspective, as in, you know, there could be ways of, in the future, maybe developing things that could sense sadness or unhappiness or lack of energy or depression. And at the same time, there could possibly be the flip side to discovering drugs or seeing how effective are they.
Tony, thanks for being very patient.
Sorry.
For a young startup, you seem to be a very pessimistic company. What about exponentiality of change? You said 20 years. I wouldn't give it even 5 years for implant technology to really progress fundamentally. You mentioned nanobots. There are already trials with nanobots, and Neuralink is releasing its first implant mid this year if they get the FDA approval, which would be a shock. It's an absolute shock in
absolutely
in that area, because it's miles ahead of anything that was dreamt in the market just 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be prepared for absolutely revolutionary.
I think we have to differentiate somewhat between personal devices and medical devices, and I think that's like one part, because the medical industry is actually quite far in implantables if we think about it in that way, and for medical purposes.
Wouldn't you think that there would be a kind of convergence of medical and say devices that identify you, the devices that extend your abilities? So it all may happen at the same time. And my one additional question is, do you have an application for your implant?
Yes, you can download it. Limited.
What does it do exactly?
It keeps your medical information. So it was the application that we showed here with the 3 screens. You can put your medical information in there and link it to your
NHS
device.
Number.
Your NHS number, if you have pre-existing medical conditions that are very important, if you're on certain medications.
1 kilobyte is it?
So that's directly on the chip, but we link to a unique identifier that links to the app. So it's a bit, obviously the long-term vision of that would be integrating into hospital systems. So a patient comes in, they just have to scan them, it immediately goes in, which reduces error for a hospital system, which reduces things like 20,000 missed medications in the world because the doctor couldn't write the drug properly. So there are, I think, to the thought of like 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, I think there's a differentiation between, yes, in 5 years' time the technology will be there to be able to do this reliably and in people, but will it be mass adoption?
I'm talking about
is
the
the
pioneers.
difference. Yeah.
As I think the major problem, not major problem, technological, will be a legal one. How do you legalize it?
Absolutely.
And protect the person's identity. So that's, the complexity of the area is just enormous. Because if somebody hacks to your body, essentially, in a few years' time, manipulate, do things that you don't want to.
Exactly. And it starts at the very beginning. I mean, when we had like our first sit-downs with our lawyers, we started with like our privacy policy of our website,
Just think positive.
And and very, very positive towards what we're trying to do and towards the future for this, because I do think that we will find a solution to work around it. But when we sat down with our lawyers and we sat down our privacy policy, so they were like, so what do you do? Like third-factor authentication, or what are you? And we were kind of like, well, we're not part of the body, we're a different device, but we're inside the body, so technically we are the body. So it threw up so many legal challenges, and that is for sure one of the areas that's going to grow very, very strongly. And we've seen it with the tech industry, completely unregulated, to now something that's becoming very, very regulated with looking at social media and so on. And it needs to be, because we need to protect people.
So predicting the future is very hard, of course. So if I go back 10 years, or maybe 2011, I remember I made many talks in 2011 forecasting a rapid uptake of wearables, that Google Glass was just around the corner, and I thought in 5 years' time everybody in a London Futurist meeting would be wearing a Google Glass. And that hasn't happened. But on the other hand, other things went faster than I expected. In particular, there were more breakthroughs in AI and deep learning than my talks in 2011 didn't have anything about deep learning hardly, because it was very much a minority interest, and occasionally I might have mentioned it. So it all depends on how fast progress can be made on hard, difficult problems. And sometimes people get a nice breakthrough and it suddenly works. Other times there are these complications, the rejections from the body, the mechanisms don't work, there's a few bad cases. Even gene therapy, it was held back because of a very sad case of a youngster called Jesse Gelsinger about 1999, which suddenly he died as what was meant to be a routine operation. That held it back. So I'm with you, it's hard to know, but I think you have to plan for multiple scenarios. You have to be ready to move faster, but
Black swan events,
also you're ready to go step by step. So I like what you're doing. You're mapping out a credible future and building up an ecosystem, and you go as fast as appropriate and be ready to go faster. You had a question as well?
Yeah, very practical one. Maybe a selfish motive behind it.
Yeah.
If I got an implant from you guys tomorrow, and I could build an right now, can I use your implant?
For the time being, yes, they're open, so you could program to it what you would want. We would be interested in what you did do, though, just out of interest from our side. So
I guess that's a follow-up though. If I were, a centimeter away from the band, could I rewrite your information to be whatever I wanted?
Just going to say, so in terms of an attack vector, you wouldn't be able to rewrite it what's on the chip in that sense. So the way that Imple's web services work is it uses the ID that's hard built into the tag as a method of authentication. So effectively like a password as a UID. So if you were close up to someone, you could read if they stored plain text information on it, which is a risk, but there are secure ways of doing it. Then you could, at that moment, read that data. But if you were then trying to access the web services, you can hit the barriers of the security of their web services. So while you could get one of their implants, you'd have to build your own app and then your own web services in the back end of it anyway. So to steal someone's health information, you'd have to, one, be near their implant, but then you'd have to go around with the security implications of how Imple's web services work. So it's not as straightforward as going up there and reading it or going up there and coding it and then you've got instant access. There's a few more steps to that.
But to be very cynical about it, I could put a note in saying no resuscitation, big uppercase bold text, and that's what she'll say.
No resuscitation. So you can kill somebody, effectively.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't be able to do that.
You wouldn't be able to do that. So,
the plain text part of it.
You can put it on, but when it reads it, it's only reading the ID to access. So what the ID would unlock their data. There would nowhere on there would it say do not resuscitate. It would only be on the chip.
But this
That's
is a
not
plain
what's
text
unlocking the medical data.
You can. If you were concerned about this threat, I mean, if someone comes a centimeter onto your skin and touches you with their phone and you don't notice it, that is a risk, but most times you would. If you are scared of that, you can lock the chip onto writing so that no one would be able to write to it except yourself. So there are measures out there. It just, at the moment, if you would purchase a chip, it would be open for you to program onto, and then it would be, you having to program or you having to format the chip in the way that you would want it to. And we could give advice for that, but you could see measures like that where you can format it where no one can write to it.
But what this question brings to mind is discussions of various incidents, people somehow able to get money out of pay-as-you-go cards. You can tap and pay up to £30 at a time. If somebody can get close enough to your credit cards, in some cases it seems they might be able to extract up to £30 at a time from it by clever hacking. And then there's all the hacking of car keys. Now you open your car by sending a signal. Other people apparently can sometimes intercept that signal, they can store it, and then when you're not around they can open your car. This is what I'm told. So
absolutely, which is why data security in this space is something absolutely vital. And if you if you look at NFC devices on cards, they have a longer read space, so you can read them up to 30 centimeters. Under the skin is a bit different. But obviously UHF devices, if we ever had them implanted, then what would happen? It would be a place to put secure measures in place, and there are technologies out there to protect these kinds of functionalities, and I think we should act on them if we have businesses in that space.
A quick follow-up on those. So you mentioned two different types of attacks. One was for the cars, it's actually called a relay attack. So as the issue with actively powered devices, not passive, they're constantly giving that signal. So they would use basically a massive antenna. They'll walk up to someone's house, they would pick up the tiny signal of someone's key, which would be left in the doorway. It would relay that to a smaller responder, basically by the car. So the car is all it's aware is it's basically receiving the car fob signal, thinking that the car key is near it, but actually it's a several different distance away. That's one of the issues with actively powered devices. But there's no second factor authentication between those two. That's the car signal, open the door. Now, when this happened and that the attack methods for that got launched, Tesla released an update to their cars to where you'd have to enter a PIN code before you could start the engine. Now, Tesla are one of the only companies to do that, but that is a second form of second factor authentication that stops that attack happening. And they were quick to fix that as well because it was their Tesla car that was used in the attack process. So the second issue with the credit card contactless payments is a process called EMV payments, and it's a method of authentication between the credit card and the readers. Now, the only way it's not really exploited into the wild as much, it is known as specific attack scenarios, but if you walked out with a contactless payment terminal, you could tap someone's phone or wallet, but it falls down to the insurance and the liability as a bank and how they would manage that, and that's where the real security of that applies. The issue with contactless payments on the cards, they cap them at £30 for that specific reason. Apple Pay and Android Pay do not have a cap because you have to unlock your phone before you can actually then perform a contactless payment. That's why you can smash £1,000 or £2,000 on a contactless on Apple Pay, and they won't care. That's fine. But contactless cards are capped for that reason as a matter of effect. So, in terms of the attacks for any implants, and I actually work in the security sector. It's kind of what I do, right? So, the attack methods are all around. I've had a conversation with you about this, about methods to protect in a similar way to a contactless credit card and how the data is encrypted, and there's mutual authentication, and there's a whole process for that. There are specific chips and there are platforms to provide that secure authentication to stop people being able to do that, like a contactless card, unless under very specific cases where someone stole a point-of-sales terminal or something like that. But it's there are a lot of security stuff out there, which works to secure the implants and how they're authenticated against them and how the data is then read of them, instead of just leaving stuff in plain text on them. So, yeah, there's some interesting developments out there already, and I'm sure Impli are already aware of implementing those.
So this is all right if Impli and other companies keep up to date with good security practice.
Yeah.
As you know, the problem with many IoT devices is that many of them have got very cheap software in them. There's a race to the bottom to produce these devices as cheaply as possible, and many devices bought from overseas don't have very solid security in them. So are you foreseeing a future in which everybody who gets an implant is aware of these things, and they don't just implant with the cheapest solution that happens to be bought from Amazon?
So it's an interesting one. So the issue with IoT and the difference between IoT and why it should be separated from implants is because IoT is Internet of Things. These are not connected to the Internet unless there's a phone by them, and then you have to have a specific application for that. So there are a whole load of range of different implants out there. Some have security features and some don't. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but there are definitely implants that have been made specifically for security purposes, and they perform against ISO standards to make sure that they work in a way that's safe and secure. So yes, China, loads of brands, they will dish stuff out without doing proper pen testing, and I've mentioned about pen testing before. It's a very important thing to do, especially against the web services. It's what we do as a day-to-day. So as long as companies keep their end at the core and they design their stuff as a secure point of view, and they keep and maintain that, yes, you'll be more than fine with this stuff. But there's so much security features out there, and technology and processes that can be put into place to properly secure this.
I think what I would add to this is, of course this will happen. Like with every industry that we saw happen, you know, the minute it becomes mainstream, you know, there's lots of competition, and then there's a lowering of standards.
There's a race to the market, and people will say, well, we intend to test it, but you know, we're in a hurry, so we'll release it and test it later.
The point is, with something like this, we need to put regulations in there, and I think regulating the devices to some degree is really necessary in this space, and this is really why we're working towards that, so that this exactly doesn't happen, and we don't suddenly have bad devices.
And when you say we're working, you mean you and other groups in this?
Our whole Impli team.
The whole Impli team.
The whole Impli team is working towards it.
But I mean, don't you have to cooperate with other companies
Absolutely,
in this as well?
So it's the reason why we're setting up an association. It's the reason why we're, you know, working closely with other companies in this space. It's the reason why, you know, we're talking to the MHRA. It's the reason, you know, of course there's
MHRA,
the medical device regulatory body.
Alan, on this.
So this is absolutely fascinating, and it brings up not just the security thing, but who's to blame when something goes wrong. And so you already mentioned when something's inside you, you know, who owns it now, and so the legal aspects, and I think this is all part of the picture. But there's also, with the security thing, with awareness, there's practices that people have to take responsibility for. So with your card in your pocket, there's something you could skim. You can get a wallet that sandwiches your card, so it can't be skimmed when it's in the wallet. I heard as devices get more advanced, they can start having functionality in them, like firmware. And some existing devices, like pacemakers, already have firmware, and they have remote. Many of them have remote update features. And there was a discussion in Spark on the radio show in Canada, where the software developer who has a pacemaker and knows that it can be remotely updated was arguing for legal access to the software of her pacemaker, so that she could satisfy herself as a security expert that she wasn't more vulnerable than she was willing to be. So there's some fascinating stuff, but it's all about awareness and privacy, access, safety, mitigation.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and that's what I kind of meant. You know, we're going to go into a future where these things will come up, and we as a population will have to deal with it as they come up, and we'll have to prevent as much as we can, and kind of legislate towards the human and towards making sure that safety comes first.
On this point?
Yeah, I also think there's also a point where you could draw a line in the sand and say, like you said, is that people need to stop trying to shift accountability and become responsible for their own lives. They start going onto the internet, putting the information out there. They don't come back later saying, I didn't put that, I didn't expect that. It's you want the benefit of the system, but you're not willing to play the game inside the system. So there's also going to be a point where someone says, I would be accountable for me, and I think we're getting to the stage where Google's the Facebooks. They're starting to draw the line saying, fine, you now opt in and consent. Therefore, you are to a certain degree limiting your own right by your own choice because you're giving that consent to do it. But you've got to be accountable at some point. And I think shifting the blame at the moment is what's happening. We've got to be honest and say, take accountability. Companies like the big guys, Google, Facebook, also need to be accountable for it. And I think that system's going to be, with regulations, it can be more defined. And I think that's an interesting space over the next 10 years.
And again?
Mine was just to tie up a few points into one. One is about the acceleration of where the implants have come from. The one in my hand is currently 5 years old. There's now an extra 400 bytes of data since I was in my your model. There's two sectors on the chip. There's secure and unsecure. So the secure side I can't change. The unsecure currently has a link to a cat video on YouTube. It's messing around. And the other one, so that's how you could show off, was what I was thinking about. And the other one that you didn't mention is I actually still my business card on here. So I just tap people's phones and it adds my company information to their phone. That's another way to show off. I just thought it was a good little.
So we can try that later.
It's the cat video right now, but I was showing my apprentice, so I was messing around.
And Phil?
Regarding security and people's confidence, it occurred to me that it's not really very long ago that people wouldn't buy things online. They just wouldn't. Now, I mean, it's a few short years. Retail sales are massively. And it's because people suddenly got this. I don't know how.
Well, the various things the government did as well, wasn't it? They said in some cases we will recompense you. And the credit cards companies also agreed that if the people's credit card details were used against their, they would be reimbursed to a certain extent. So people got more confidence to use it in that case. So I think it was industry action backed up by legislation, encouraged people to do it, and now we are much more comfortable buying things online. But it did change quickly. For many people said, no, I can't imagine doing this at all. And people are buying incredibly expensive things online now.
But people bank online as well.
But people get your medication from online doctors without even seeing one face to face.
Amazon was a bookstore, I'm just saying. That's how far we've come in this short space.
Yeah. But it's also like from wearables to now, I mean 2009, that is really not very long ago.
Anybody else want to raise a point that hasn't spoken in the conversation yet?
Yeah, one quick point. I was wondering if there's a bit of that potential application for people who work in extreme environments, astronauts, deep sea divers, sports people. And now that might make quite a nice way of publicising the company. Have you made any approaches in those areas?
We thought a lot about kind of, people who are under a lot of stress. And there has been research been done out there for people in the medical field, in the special forces, going to the Arctic and wanting and needing to measure their vitals and their lactate levels to optimize their levels out there. But also I've been approached by quite a lot of triathletes or very high performing sports people who are trying to push for more information. And if for example, the glucose sensors with the micro needles that are out there that you stick on, they're all using that, but they would obviously much rather have an implantable device. So there is a very nice niche in that space. And when I showed that loop about preventative medicine and kind of body optimization, I think that falls very much into that niche, which is a niche at the moment, but could become mainstream in order to prevent a healthcare service to be overloaded.
And the military might be interested as well. Did you see that?
Absolutely. And they're using some of the applications already. So the military has big interest in this, of course.
Well, I have a couple of questions I've been waiting to feed into the conversation. One is on the international landscape. Today, it seems that Sweden is the country which is the biggest adoption of these devices, both in terms of numbers and maybe use cases. What would you imagine might be the case in 5 or 10 years' time? Do you see, your survey didn't look at this, it just looked at Europe, but if there was a survey around the whole world, and if you project what might happen, do you think that it's going to be here in London that we're going to have the biggest update, or somewhere else in the world that's going to...
Asia is quite strong.
Asia is quite strong?
We don't go into Asia, but the Asians are definitely looking into it, and if you look at the Asians as people and their history, their privacy is not the same as Europeans. Looking at their, how they grew up and the government's involvement into their life. If we look at their tax system that's based on facial recognition and so on, they're already very far ahead of that. They're also very innovative in electronics, so I do believe that Asia is a place that's going to spark up quickly in this. In the US, it's being done. It's being done already. I mean, people are using this in the US. There are companies out there doing this. There's a big interest. Would be interesting, and I'm hoping to launch some market research over there to understand a little bit more about how that market works, and see if there's any possibilities there, and see if there might be applications there that might be very interesting, simply because the healthcare system in America is pushing towards preventative healthcare because of the way the government regulates this.
And as you mentioned, insurance companies might help tip things along. Insurance companies might say, well, if you have this implantable, we're going to reduce your...
Could be. I mean, we've seen in the wearables, it's nothing new to us. We've seen it like in that space. We've seen it with our phones, it's already connected. We've seen it with genomic data, if we look at that, and 23andMe and what they've been kind of doing. It could be a version of the future, and it's probably a very, very likely one in order to assess risks.
So just to add to that, an actual bank, Sparda Bank over in Berlin, so they offered to give an implant with their home insurance.
Yeah. Offered to give people an implant with their home insurance.
Yeah, to work with NFC locks on their doors.
Yeah.
And that was this year. Oh, that was recent months. I say this year.
Yeah. So they put locks on the doors that can only be opened by people.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, you would use your hands to unlock the door and allow them into the building, and that would be provided free as part of the bank's insurance, which is one of the bigger things that happened for that.
Do you have any idea what the take-up of that has been?
No, that's mainly done by our German lot over there. That's not directly with us. So.
It was quite interesting. Also, I'm German.
Oh yes.
So I kind of followed that story a little bit and read a little bit up on that. It's quite interesting. They only launched it in Berlin, so they were very targeted about the audience that they did this with, and it did have some uptake. I mean, it's a bit of a trend in Germany at the moment as well. Going over there, which was surprising for me as a German, because normally they're quite critical. But in this field, they're actually quite far along.
Well, Berlin's a very special city, isn't it?
Yeah, Berlin is a special city.
Yeah.
I was going to say black boxes in cars is also the same thing for insurance. Install this in your car, it's 50% off your insurance.
They can measure how you drive.
Yeah.
At first, people thought, I don't want these black boxes in my car, they'll know where I'm driving.
Still don't have one in my car.
It's more that you know how fast I'm driving, that scares me rather than where.
Vitality is a very good example.
Vitality?
Vitality. So Discovery, which is a South African-based company, created Vitality, which basically incentivizes benefits. So they sell the insurance, car, whatever it may be, and they loop it back through a program like Vitality. So they give you discounts on different aspects. So then they said, actually, going to a movie once a month meant that you were going to live longer. Therefore, they gave you access to cheaper movies. And they've developed that process. And now they've gone to China and the UK, and they've done significant advancement. And Adrian Gore, who's the CEO there, has focused on saying the next stage, just the next evolution of what they're doing now, effectively, because they can get more accurate data, which closer reading points, so biosensors. I think that's where it's leading to. So it's an interesting space.
Based on what, I mean, I've got a question for the audience now. Based on what you've heard, is there anybody who says there's no way I'm ever going to have an implant?
This is like a biased question.
How should I rephrase that?
Maybe how many people have an implant already?
By nature, the people coming to this talk.
Well, I guess there might be instances. All right, so if the people hadn't been here, what are the strongest arguments people would still give against implanting ever?
Implanting.
So I still don't really know enough about the physical experience and also the consequences. Like, do I have to be wary of MRI scans? You know, does everything have to be taken out, or will something just get ripped out of my body accidentally because I'm not aware of the consequences of adopting something? Because it's like a new thing, so you've got to get your head around it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And how painful would it be? You know, it's like, can you compare it to something else that's already painful?
I
The same amount.
It was no more than a slight. So obviously in the insertion with the needle, feels like something's going through your skin, and it was a relatively quick process, less than 5 minutes. It's clean, and there's a slight dull ache for about 20 minutes, but I've now got full functionality of my hand. I haven't got loss of grip or anything like that, and you'll see some slight swelling and the bleeding stopped. And that was less than 3 hours ago.
Yeah.
Will it set off the airports now?
It doesn't set up airports. I've taken many flights since
Is there
then.
metal in it? Is it metal inside? Is it magnetic? Is it magnetized?
Copper inside a bioplastic. Copper coil to catch the energy.
So could heat up if there was a field that was changing, for example, because of induction. Like, so it was just a science soul.
Yeah, no, and many people ask that question about MRIs, and you know, is it compatible?
Yeah.
It's compatible with an MRI. You know, you'll for sure be able to see it in the MRI, but it doesn't. You know, it doesn't kind of bring your hand up to the magnet or any other situations that you can imagine.
So an induction charger, like so, you know, in Starbucks you can put your phone on a plate and charge up your phone. If you put something that's conductive in between that, it's possible that you get induced current that then heats up the material. So that's, you know, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not an expert in the consequences of implants. So I would like to understand what the consequences are.
Not that we've seen. I mean, I have a charger that is inductive, and I have put my hand on it many times, but not maybe. Like,
yeah, it might be that it's ruled out by resonance. It can't, you know, can't do damage.
That definitely.
You'd need to tune it.
Human centered design, once you're making an abortion, I think of any medication I've taken, you actually look at the possible side effects. You know, those that I just totally, I look at and I'm aware of, and I'm a rational person, I think, but potentially I'm going to benefit from this rather than suffer the detrimental consequences of a reaction. And there's so much more we're talking about that I think it is, you know, eventually the incentive for people to do this will just tip. And my own personal experience, is not the same thing, is having 40 kids in before Christmas. I had a cat for about 20 years. It had to have a chip put in it. And for me, it was a no-brainer. And now that the cat has a chip in it, I'm sort of thinking, I've got 2 kids. Even if I could just see where they are within like a mile from their house, that would be useful. So.
Yeah, I was totally thinking about that very early on in this your presentation. I have a toddler at home, and I thought, brilliant. It would be fantastic to see what his temperature is, what's wrong with him, if he's sick, and especially where the heck is he.
It was made about the black box, the insurance. I think it was Aviva. I can't remember.
It was, yeah. I worked on that project.
And it's just a brilliant idea because it's totally changing that the idea of we're in a strange place where people are putting all sorts of information out there quite willingly and perhaps not being cognizant of the consequences and trying to look for somebody else to be held to account. But actually, when it's reversed and the proposal is actually this is really beneficial to you, and you're going to get benefits from having this information feedback to you in a useful way, it's almost the no-brainer of that stuff to think, well, great, and this was it Vitality in South Africa years ago.
Yeah, they were big innovators in that space.
It sounds incredible. It's, you know, what an
I
amazing.
cannot imagine it selling to teenagers. A gadget that tells their parents at any time where they are and what they do.
Find my friends. Apple do it.
Yeah,
I mean,
teenagers aren't stupid. They'll find ways around it, like we did when we were teenagers. It's not infallible.
But can you actually be traced where you are with a chip like this?
No, and you couldn't unless someone read it and uploaded that information.
But how does it work with
of
cats? It's a
location.
different...
The cats have it for identification.
Yeah,
They
it's a
don't have
reader.
it for tracking.
it's only when they pass by readers.
Yes, so you need to. So I have a dog, and when we go to France, we put the dog in the boot, and the guy comes and scans the ID card, and it kind of reflects the system, so that stolen dogs won't be a problem anymore. It's more on that side rather than the tracking.
I suppose again, listening to all the benefits, and it feels like there's a Rubicon. You cross the Rubicon when you decide to have an implant, because it's less easy to change. I think the mindset. So when you talked about the adoption of online payments and how long that took, and all of a sudden there seemed to be, it just went away, and so many people doing it. The difference with having it implanted, this idea of how accessible the actual device is, as opposed to this, which is like another vital organ that I carry around, that this is something that's always with me and has so much on it. I feel that, I suppose if I use the kitten again, a friend of mine has a company called Paw Tracker, and he's been doing this for years, and it's basically what we were talking about. So you can't, with the reading, the chips that you read track, but with another device obviously you can, and when it can relate to one of those things, I can take a device, a secondary device, put it on a child if I want to, and sync it up to that chip, and okay, that's them currently, it's locked onto that. You know, all of these things are possible, and it feels like at a certain point when the value proposition for the device and the service have proved themselves, then embedding it seems a no-brainer.
Especially with the infrastructure that comes with it. I think the value discussion needs to happen in the ecosystem and the ability to do the ease of it.
Yeah.
And as soon as that convenience factor will be a massive, where the adoption increases significantly when they get the value and the ecosystem and infrastructure to support it.
So last question from me is, how often do you organise the implanting sessions?
Yeah, so currently we're looking at every 2 weeks, one session. So they're not so frequently, but
And it's better to do it with more than one person at a time, is it? Against economies of scale.
It's economies of scale. So we're hoping to get more uptake with the marketing that we do, and with the optimizing software products that are out there, and obviously like the convenience factor, and building systems around that. So hopefully then to run a place that has a constant flow. That's the future.
Now you're looking for more investment, for more employees, or more partners, or what?
We are looking. We're very interested in partnerships. We're very interested in hearing about possible problems that we can solve. We are looking into investment. At some stage, we're applying for grant money from the UK to develop further products, and linking that up with our investment rounds that we're going through. So we are looking for investment later on this year. So if anyone's interested on that front, we'd also be very happy to speak.
Final questions from the audience?
Is there a waiting list?
Is there a waiting list?
There are some people on the list, because as we organize these events bi-weekly, we always gather all the people and then do one of these events. So there's not a waiting list per se in terms of devices, but there are people on the list that are in the next cohort of sessions that we are running.
Julia?
So I have a question. So we're talking about technology, we're talking about insurance companies that possibly incentivize the use of implants. We're talking about doors being opened through our implant. What about those countries that cannot afford to have such doors, for example? If suddenly the implants get adopted, and hopefully yes, and all those countries that can afford it, they actually do it. How will the other countries deal with it? They will be kind of an exclusion, discrimination.
You have that with every technology, right? When the first mobile phone was invented, not everyone could afford it because they were quite expensive devices, and they were for sure first adopted in certain regions and not in others. You'll have that with commercial technology, for sure, to some degree. However, it very much depends on the need you're trying to solve in certain areas with this technology. It doesn't have to be in this very commercial space. It could be in a very non-for-profit way. You could say we're helping immigrants keep their medical data on them at all times, because we know that they travel a lot, which means that they don't have their medical records with them. So there are non-for-profit ways where you could bring that to people, or like in Africa, where a lady might give birth in one clinic and might end up in another, and you might want to have the patient record with her rather than with the clinics itself. And as everyone now has a mobile device, wherever mine is, as everyone now has a mobile device, even in the developing countries, I think it's an interesting aspect of this technology actually being used for good applications out there.
Absolutely, yes. Please don't take my question as critic. It was more, since we were talking about disease prevention and monitoring, very precise monitoring of our health conditions. It was more like an ethical question.
Yeah.
But it's not for you to decide, obviously.
No. That is very true, and I think that we should use technology for good. And I think there should be aspects out there, and we're looking at trying to find aspects that could be really helpful in the non-for-profit sector, and where these technologies can actually also be used where they are actually needed.
So if anybody in the room has such an idea, or if anybody watching the video in due course has such an idea, get in touch with Simply.
Yes, please.
I'll ask you to thank Anna-Louise in a minute. I'll just mention a couple of other things. There is a chance to continue this discussion informally. We'll move out of this room shortly and move towards a nearby pub. So if those are interested in having a wider discussion about futurism, wider discussion about the good things that can happen with technology and the risks we have to face up to, then it's a chance to do that in the pub. We also have online discussions. There are various things. There's a Slack that's, if you go to londonfuturist.com, you'll see a link and an invite to London Futurist Slack, which is another possibility to discuss things. Forthcoming meetings coming up, as I mentioned already, in 3 weeks' time there's an event with the speaker Martin Dienoff, who is going to talk about what can we sense about the human mental state, how can we do that by analysing voice and other things, and how can we accelerate more people being in a good mental state as a result of these tools and a better awareness of our mental state. There are a number of other London Futurist meetings. I'm giving a talk myself, not in Birkbeck, but in Newspeak House. I think it's on the 5th of March, which is in the middle of the week, on what I've called Towards a Techno-Progressive New Deal, which is what are the social changes necessary to get the best benefits for everybody for technology, rather than just possibly benefiting the rich or the well-off. So that's a broader discussion. You'll find other things online too. I found this a very useful discussion. I'm much wiser now about the various opportunities that are here and now. Of course, I'm still interested in nanobots in due course, but I realise that the full Kurzweilian vision of nanobots rejuvenating me might be later than the very practical solutions that are being developed here now. So, Anna-Louise, thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure having you.